the newsagents.
In Tuesday night's debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, we all remember the eye-popping, jaw-dropping bits, the cats and dogs being eaten by illegal immigrants, the babies being executed. Outlandish? Yeah. Unusual? Extraordinary? Bizarre? Actually, par for the course from Donald Trump, who has been a one-man conspiracy machine at times.
The politics of conspiracy has always been central to Donald Trump. It's always been central to MAGA. It's always been there in American politics in one form or another. But in recent years, it has been getting worse and has been taking more and more people in. Why is that? What makes America such a centrifuge of conspiracy? And why does it threaten to envelop our politics as well? Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's Jon.
It's Lewis.
And it is extraordinary that when you go to America, you just feel that suspicion is the watchword of everyone. They don't believe what they're seeing. Things that are obviously in front of your eyes, you think there must be some darker purpose to it. And the conspiracy theory has guided so much of American politics and is playing such a role in this election as well, where on the Trumpian MAGA right in American politics, you think that this is about a deep state that is trying to subvert and destroy the American people.
Yeah, and it's always been there, but it does feel, we reported on it when we were at the DNC in Chicago, went into Indiana, it does feel as if the politics of conspiracy is now not just around and there, just under the surface, but it's there for all to see. And what it is doing is creating completely separate political realities for different groups of people. We spoke in Indiana to Republicans who said that they'd lost relatives because people had gone down the conspiracy rabbit hole, the MAGA conspiracy rabbit hole, to such an extent that they can no longer talk to them. And so we thought that given after that debate, with Trump sort of regurgitating so many more and not probably going to paying a significant political price for it, that it would be worthwhile kind of doing a deep dive on why conspiracy matters so much to modern American politics, why it has emerged from a kind of subterranean level to politics, to being out in the open. And one person who's thought about that a lot is Gabriel Gatehouse, who's an old BBC colleague of ours, who has written a book, an anatomy really, of conspiracy and the politics of conspiracy and why it matters.
Yeah, we are going to do a deep dive on today's episode into rabbit holes, and we may never come out at the other end. Well, we are joined in the studio now by Gabriel Gatehouse, writer, brilliant chronicler of sort of the underbelly of Trumpism and the conspiracy theories that surrounded and came with him and were often oxygenated by him. And his new book is The Coming Storm, a journey into the heart of the conspiracy machine. I think what's interesting about the title is the idea that it isn't just random individuals, atomized, who are coming up with these conspiracy theories, but it's a bit more organised than that.
I think in some cases it is. Right. I mean, if you looked at how QAnon, this kind of crazy narrative about a cabal of satanic paedophiles that was secretly ruling America, that was very niche in 2020, but was very powerful and helped drive the mob into the Capitol on January the 6th. The way that germinated, it was partly organic on kind of niche internet forums like 4chan, but it was very much oxygenated, in your word, supercharged by people in the Trump orbit. They did it on purpose. They knew, in the words of one person I interviewed for the book, they didn't really know where all this stuff was coming from, but they knew it was useful to them. I mean, there's that brilliant Trump clip. Do you remember when he was asked about QAnon in 2020? And the journalist asks him at a White House briefing, she says, so the idea is that you are fighting this satanic cabal of paedophiles and fighting to save the world. Is that something you think you're behind? And he goes, well, I don't know much about it, but is that supposed to be a bad thing or a good thing?
Well, but he also, I mean, I think I was at that briefing, and he also said, but they like me.
Yeah, they like me very much.
But which is a very Donald Trump response. If as long as they like me, I'm with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that was then, and you talk about QAnon and the power that they had and the kind of hold that they had on a subsection of the Trump base. But the whole idea of QAnon was it was like going to be like the second coming, that there was going to be this storm,
The Great Awakening.
the Great Awakening, and that Joe Biden would be swept away.
Executed.
But it never happened.
No.
So do people still believe, or do they have they come to their senses and thought, what on earth did I buy into that for?
Sadly not. Q, this kind of anonymous figure who was posing as a secret insider, leaking details of this great intelligence operation to oust the cabal, has disappeared, basically stopped posting. QAnon is kind of dead. But the narrative that American elites involved in child sex trafficking are secretly controlling events has completely seeped into the mainstream Republican politics, but across the board, actually. I mean, there was some fantastic polling by YouGov, so, kind of respectable polling that in America around December last year, where about 25% of voters on both sides of the spectrum thought that senior politicians from both parties were involved in sex trafficking. And then they put this statement to them. They said, no matter who is in charge of the government or other organizations, a single group of people secretly control events and rule the world together. What percentage do you think agreed with that? Go on.
Well, I would like to say 0.001%, but I'm suspecting it's going to be significantly higher.
Well, I subscribe to it. Having met John Sopel.
41%. So, we're getting on for nearly half the electorate, right? So this idea that American democracy is a facade, what you see isn't what you get, is completely in the mainstream. So we've heard a lot about, a bit less since Joe Biden is not at the top of the ticket anymore, but this idea that a second Trump presidency would be an existential threat to American democracy. We've heard a lot about that, but these are guys, this 41%, they believe democracy has already been subverted.
How central do you think the politics of conspiracy is to Trumpism? And more than that as well, I mean, how different do you think it is? In the sense that, I mean, it is easy to think, right, that this sort of conspiratorial politics started or at least became normalised with Trump, which is probably unarguable. But it is true to say that American politics in particular has always had a conspiratorial bent. I mean, you go back to the assassination of JFK, go back to the 19th century and the Know Nothing. I mean, seriously, you pick your starting point and you can see it's always been, for whatever reason, a strong undercurrent in American politics. How new do you think it is, or what is different about it?
In a way, it's not new, and you put your finger on it exactly. And in the book and in this new series, the podcast, we go into the John Birch Society in the 50s, this group founded by a retired candy merchant named Robert Welch in 1958, who had a lot of time on his hands and saw everything through the prism of a diabolical communist plot, right? He thought President Eisenhower was a secret communist agent. But more than that, he was Mr. One World Government. He thought that politicians in Washington and the politicians in the Kremlin were in league to create one world government. And, even in the 60s and 70s and 80s, even arch conservatives thought he was a crank, right? But this idea now is on fire, right? The idea of one world government, not just in America, but here as well, if you look at the internet. How different is it? I think it's been supercharged, partly because of technology and the internet and all of those kind of reasons that have been much rehearsed and we talk about a lot. But in terms of the election, and there are many ways of framing this kind of current contest, but one of the ways of framing it, I think, is we're obviously no longer talking about, a centre-left and a centre-right party battling out in a stable system, right? That's for the birds. We've essentially got the Democrats representing the party that wants to conserve the system. Order, yeah, the current order, the establishment. They are the conservative party. They want to conserve the system versus Trump, MAGA, the avatar for people who think that the system is so rotten because of these conspiracy theories that they want to tear it all down. And Project 2025 is part of that. The kind of this idea to dismantle the administrative state. I spoke to people who said, they want to abolish the federal government. They call it the rogue three-letter agencies, the FBI, the CIA, the Fed, the DOJ, all of them, right? Get rid of them all.
But if you look at Project 25, and this is the sort of supposed blueprint for what a second Trump administration would look like, even though Donald Trump is now trying to put distance between himself and some of the crazier ideas.
But it's been written by his people.
It's written by former administration officials who worked for him. It looks to me like it's not so much... I mean, it's dismantling the American state as we know it in the terms of three co-equal branches of government, the legislature, the executive and the judiciary. But instead saying the executive, i.e. the president, is kind of almost all-knowing, all-powerful, doesn't answer to anybody. And if you want to work in the White House or the Pentagon, you owe your fealty to the president and can be sacked at a moment's notice if you don't do exactly what that president says.
And so what does that sound like to you?
Sounds like dictatorship.
Right, exactly. The D word, right? Now, for this book, I went to an extraordinary event in New York. There's this tech movement which has big Silicon Valley money behind it. It's called the Network State Movement. It's a kind of dreamt up by a tech entrepreneur called Balaji Srinivasan. He's like a sort of rock star in crypto circles. Because he's like Madonna. He just goes by his first name, Balaji. And he's got this idea that, tech, Silicon Valley, is replacing all of these legacy institutions, right? Goodbye New York Times, hello YouTube, education, space travel, all the kind of legacy things, universities, like all of this stuff, tech can do better. So if tech can do all of the institutions better, tech can do countries better, right? The network state. They think that the kind of concept of the nation state is about to collapse under the weight of new technology in the same way as the kind of printing press 500 years ago did for the feudal order and created the modern world. They think that the internet, new tech, blockchain, AI is going to do for the nation state, and they want to build the next new thing. So one of these network state groupings is a group called Praxis, and they're kind of run by a bunch of sort of alt-right adjacent 4chan kind of troll kind of guys who host these legendary parties that journalists aren't supposed to be allowed into. And I got myself an invite somehow. And so I go to this place in the East Village at a nightclub in Manhattan. And it's all of these kind of young crypto bros in their 20s who are going, yeah, the transition period to the next stage is going to be very Darwinistic. It's going to be very violent. And they're just pumped about that. It's going to be brilliant, they say. One guy I spoke to, he said, well, democracy is great and all that, but actually much better to have an enlightened dictator, right? So these guys who think they are kind of on the cusp of running the world, they're open about this. They don't want liberal democracy. They don't want liberal democracy. They think it's holding them back.
So this is really interesting, right? Because there has been, I mean, historically, if you go back to sort of the Reagan turn of the 80s, there have always been people on the kind of right of American politics who wanted to dismantle the federal government or at least reduce it to a sort of absolute minimal state. And they wanted to do so because they saw it as a restoration. They thought that the aberration was that the federal state, had become too big ever since the New Deal and FDR. So they were going back to them.
Hamilton versus Jefferson.
Indeed so. But what you're talking about is a different sort of force, which actually see American politics and politics generally evolving into not so much a reversion, but something new that might involve not a reversion of going back to the structures as they were, but changing the structures in a more dictatorial direction, more absolutist direction.
I mean, kind of corporate franchised statelets. Like their idea is, imagine you choose a gym membership, right? You can go to Virgin Active if you like their package and where they are, or you could go to, I don't know, any number of others. That's how they imagine you would do citizenship, right? You just choose your citizenship the same way you choose a gym membership or Soho House. I'm not saying this is not what most kind of Trump supporters are thinking about, right? This is a narrow subsection of kind of Silicon Valley.
Where the money's coming from.
Exactly, it's where the money's coming from. So, part of it is this kind of confluence of historical forces, which, as you say, Lewis, goes back to the 80s. It goes back to FDR and the New Deal and this idea. I mean, the number of people who bring up the Federal Reserve in this world and think that the Federal Reserve...
The central bank of the
United States. The central bank. The
guys, the Bank of England.
Yeah, the guys in charge of the money, right, is a sort of an illusion, a sort of a trick to create big government, to create totalitarian rule.
And that's why they love crypto. Because
That's
it's
why
not
they love
controlled by
crypto, because it's the
government. So
opposite.
it all goes
to
full
that. There you
circle.
go,
in the end.
yeah, the crypto bros are the new gold bugs.
But
right?
what do these people? What do they think of Trump? Where does Trump fall into? Is he just a vehicle, a useful vehicle?
These guys see Trump as a useful battering ram, right? He's the wrecking ball. They like disruption, right? And Trump is a disruptor.
We've had the debate this week, and the two kind of standout, obvious kind of, oh my God, memories of it are they're eating your cats, they're eating your dogs,
Yeah.
and babies are being executed after they've been born, because that's what Democrats support. I suppose my question is, was that part of deliberate laying the seeds of a conspiracy, or was that Donald Trump, ill-disciplined brain fart?
I'm not sure those two things are that different, right? I think Donald Trump is, in a way, like an absolutely kind of visceral instinct politician, right? He's got killer instinct. I mean,
Yeah.
as you know better than I do. So I think, as we discussed about the QAnon thing, I know they like me very much. He understands what narratives, what stories are going to help him, what are going to go viral, what is going to get the engagement. One of the trolls, kind of internet trolls that we talk about in the book, he had this great phrase. He said, "Conflict is attention, and attention is power." And Donald Trump understands that. He lives and breathes that. And that is why he is so successful.
But something I was thinking about a lot during that debate. I mean, Trump mentioned any number of either well-known or sometimes, in some cases, really not very well-known kind of MAGA conspiracy theories. The sort of thing that you would have to have quite a lot of kind of investment in kind of the MAGA sort of information universe to even know what he's talking about, right? Little references to, probably half a dozen or even more sort of conspiracies or kind of memes and things that they talk about. I was just sat there wondering, to what extent does he himself actually believe it? To what extent is he a progenitor of these things? Or is he just so part of the universe that he unwittingly helped create that he himself is kind of carried along by these things?
No, I think it's the latter. I think he's a vessel.
Yeah.
He's a conductor of, like a lightning conductor, not as opposed to an orchestral conductor. He's an avatar. Trump is what people project on him now, and that perhaps is his strength, I think.
So I was reading that the cats and dogs thing. I think it's a woman called Laura Loomer, who is one of the sort of far right political young activists or whatever, who had Trump's ear and said, what you should be saying in the debate is they're eating the cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio. And sure enough, Donald Trump blurts it out.
And he just does, yeah.
But does he think, okay, so going back to your kind of what leads to power, is he feeling pleased today about the way cats and dogs has been received, or is he thinking, Jesus, that was a stupid thing to say?
Oh, I don't think he's thinking that. No, I think everyone's talking about the cats and dogs now, right? And on the MAGA end of the political spectrum, they're saying it's a mainstream media cover-up, the fact that, they called the city council and the city council denied it. Well, of course they would deny it, that kind of thing. No, I think, Donald Trump, his main takeaway from that would be the moment when, Kamala Harris needled him about his crowd sizes, right? That, I think that's the only thing he's going to remember, because in a way, as a person, I think that's the only thing he cares about.
Do you think any of it matters?
Well,
I mean, the debate itself, does it matter?
No, the debate is what Daniel Boorstin called a pseudo event. They began in 1960 with Nixon versus JFK, and it is the embodiment of politics as spectacle and politics as kind of theatre. It doesn't matter.
It mattered to Biden.
It did matter to Biden. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, that
was spectacle and event.
That was spectacle
and
event.
Fusion.
Yeah, it was a rare moment where a debate wasn't a pseudo event; it was an actual.
But it's not a pseudo event when you've got 68 million people watching it. I mean, surely the idea that everyone's made up their mind, they're all convinced, they've all believed their conspiracy theories, then there is no need to watch it, because you're only going to get confirmation.
That's right. But in a way,
it's entertainment as well.
It's an entertainment. But in a way, this whole election, right? There are two possible outcomes. One is Trump wins, and he does what some have suggested he will try and do, and is try and dismantle some of the institutions of democracy and the administrative state, and we will see how robust those institutions are. The other option is that Kamala Harris wins, and then what? Trump goes, okay, fair cop, I'm going to go back to Mar-a-Lago and
get imprisoned.
Or go to jail, yeah. Or he's going to say, no, they stole it again. Of course that's what he's going to say, right? Well, there's very, very little doubt about that, right? So we know that if Trump doesn't win, he's going to say it was stolen. We know that tens of millions of Americans genuinely believe, like we talk about the cynical people who know that this is bogus, the Tucker Carlsons and the Steve Bannons who know this. We know this from court, the court filings that Tucker Carlson knew it was bogus, but he was worried about their ratings. But let's forget about the cynics for a minute. Let's just talk about the people who genuinely believe that their election was stolen from them because of the kind of onslaught on media, because their commander-in-chief told them, blah, blah, blah. If Kamala Harris wins and Trump says it's stolen again, they've had their election in their mind stolen for the second time. Then they really will begin to think.
I honestly think that there's a third scenario. I think that scenario one is Trump wins. Scenario two is Trump says the election was stolen. The only third scenario, which I think for the sake of American democracy is a kind of satisfactory outcome, is that Kamala Harris wins by such a large margin that Trump can't say, I lost.
But he didn't. Biden won big in 2020.
Yeah,
still
but
it
was 10,000
votes
by Arizona
vote, but,
and Georgia votes. It was very tight.
Yeah, but I don't think that's going to happen.
No, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah. So then we're kind of let's forget that for a second. Which of these two scenarios do we think is going to be more likely to result in the survival of the American political system as it stands? I might be tempted to go, let's take our chances with the institutions.
You talked about the idea of thinking about American politics as not being left or right, but the forces of order and disorder. Could you not look at it even more narrowly than that and talk about two parties, one of which believes wholeheartedly in conspiracy and one that doesn't? Or do you think that actually the politics of conspiracy is alive on the left?
Do you remember that time in early 2017 when suddenly we were all convinced that the President of the United States was a Kremlin agent?
Yeah. The Steele dossier.
That was a conspiracy theory, guys. And
that's what Trump often says. When people ask him about conspiracy, he points to things like that.
And he's right. It was like there were obviously grains of truth here and there, stuff, and no doubt he probably would have done more for the. But the fact is, there was no P-tape. He wasn't a paid-for Kremlin asset. This whole conspiracy theory consumed the liberal left, the media, the establishment for the entirety of the Trump presidency. So I'm afraid that conspiracy theories are on both sides.
So does it go if Trump loses? Could this be the high watermark?
No, I'm afraid not. I really fear not. I don't want to be in the business of predicting trouble. But if Trump loses, he will say that it was stolen. Ergo, more conspiracy. The conspiracy is deeper and darker and more locked down than you ever thought. How are you going to fight it?
And people say he'll run again. He won't.
He's not going to live forever, right?
No, I know, but he's.
One of the things we're here talking about The Coming Storm, and we're not talking about Strangeland, which is my book, which comes out in 2 weeks.
There is more than one book.
Yeah,
I know that's difficult for you to.
That's a difficult concept. Really difficult concept. But one of the things that fascinated me about coming back from America after 8 years away was the idea. In British politics, you always thought, they're just so hopeless, they're cock up, they couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery. And suddenly conspiracy theories are kind of being exercised and ventilated in British politics as well. Liz Truss talking about how she was brought down by forces of darkness at the Bank of England and all the rest of it. Are we getting some of that here?
Well, I think we are getting some of that here. What is interesting about Liz Truss is that what brought Liz Truss down was system says no. Right? The system says, whatever it is you're trying to do, Liz Truss, it doesn't work under the current system. You may have your ideas. So in a way,
it doesn't work if a state's got to borrow money.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
Is what
she had to do, right? So it's the system basically just says no. Now, you can think of that as a conspiracy, if you like. It's the financial system that is basically stopping you from doing what you think you want to do.
An unusual conspiracy for a self-avowed Thatcherite.
Exactly.
No, the free market.
Indeed. I mean, the degree of doublethink in these circles is extraordinary. But in a way, like if you're looking for the grain of truth behind all these conspiracy theories, I think it is that what the people who say a single group of people are secretly controlling events, where they've hit upon something is that the politicians that we elect are less powerful and less able to influence events compared to other people whom we didn't elect, who maybe work in finance and tech and etc., than, let's say, in the 1950s, in the heyday of kind of post-war big state government. So in a way, the people who believe in these conspiracy theories have hit on a truth, or maybe they believe in them because there is this kind of wider sense that our ability to politically control our environment, economically control our environment, is decreasing. And that's kind of what Liz Truss bumped up against.
What role do you think Musk is playing in all of this? Because he's a relatively new entrant in terms of being such a public,
so political.
Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? So when a few days ago he tweeted this meme that's been doing the rounds of a shadowy person in a grey suit, you can't even see their face, with a Biden puppet, and he whips off the Biden puppet and puts on the Kamala Harris puppet. He tweeted that. It's been seen like hundreds of millions of times. He, I think, is playing a big role in really kind of mainstreaming this. This kind of stuff is just kind of accepted as like, yeah, it's true, isn't it? I mean, if you look at Joe Rogan, I'm going to spend a bit of time watching the Joe Rogan podcast, a podcast that's almost as popular and successful as yours.
Well, it's because he's got the shadowy figures on his side.
he's got
We're
the cabal.
Just like the underdogs.
The level of just basic kind of conspiracy theory that runs through that, like just and all of his guests, all of these free thinkers who, in Helen Lewis's brilliant phrase in her, you should read her profile in The Atlantic about the world of Joe Rogan. Austin, Texas, this place full of free thinkers who all happen to think alike, but they all kind of believe in these same kind of nebulous conspiracy theories, which in the case of Joe Rogan run from, kind of aliens built the pyramids to JFK to COVID to, like just a whole kind of morass of conspiracy theory. And it's people
podcasts are a big part of this world.
They are a big part of this world, yeah. So podcasts, Joe Rogan, people like Elon Musk, who, may or may not have a role in government or in dismantling government should Donald Trump get in. He said he's going to be he's
going to be
proposed the efficiency czar. I think he's called it the Department of Government Efficiency, which obviously the acronym is Doge, which is his own cryptocurrency. I think he plays a big role.
What's the obviously you spent a lot of time studying QAnon.
Yes.
Which is sort of, I suppose, almost kind of ancient history, but in
it is
conspiracy world kind of time. What's the weirdest newer one that you've come across while researching the book?
Did you come across the one where Taylor Swift was a cabal psyop? This is before she endorsed Kamala Harris. This is sort of towards the end of last year. There was some kind of kerfuffle at the Super Bowl, and they announced something, and Taylor Swift came on, and the whole of MAGA world decided that Taylor Swift was a NATO psyop to try and hypnotize American women into voting for Biden.
I can get behind that. Yeah, completely. But what do we do about it? I mean, is there anything it's so we sort of chin stroke, right? And there's been over the last 10 years endless sort of rumination about how journalism responds, in particular the media responds to this world of where conspiracy is commonplace. People, we say, actually really ordinary normal people disappear down the rabbit hole really quickly,
and it's a serious thing.
And is there anything at this point that can be done?
Well,
because they're not listening to us. We know.
Well, I think what doesn't help is sort of rebutting and fact checking, and it doesn't help. At least it doesn't help the people who are in the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. What I think the only response is to take conspiracy theories seriously, but not literally. Because a conspiracy theory tells you something, doesn't necessarily tell you what the conspiracy theory wants to tell you, but it tells you something else. It tells you something about society. It's like a sort of little viral capsule of societal information that tells you where we're at. And the fact that there are so many conspiracy theories that all basically boil down to the idea that the system is rotten at the moment tells you something.
And the fact that so many people are susceptible to them. Not the people who are fully down the rabbit hole who came up with them, but who are kind of like rabbit hole adjacent.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so I think what this tells you is that for many people the system is not working. That we should take seriously. And I think where, just to bring it back to US politics, where the Democrats have sort of painted themselves into a bit of a corner in the face of a sort of onslaught of mendaciousness and nonsense coming from the other side, is that they have sort of become the party of no, everything's fine. Like, don't rock the boat. Don't mess with the system. It's all fine. Just leave it alone. And that, I think, is not going to fly. And the conspiracy theories tell us that that's not going to fly. That's what we should be listening to.
It's interesting. How do you counter it? And hearing there that podcasts are part of it, the furniture of getting conspiracy theories out there. So does that make us part of the solution or part of the problem? Because I think on this podcast, I believe that what we're doing is journalistic, is trying to keep people well informed, engaged, idea that there is such a thing as truth, and often trying to puncture or raise an eyebrow at some of the conspiracy theories that get ventilated. Yeah, I guess we're doing it on a platform that is a kind of magnifier of conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, I suppose you have to go back to sort of first principles and ask, what conspiracy theory is. I mean, we were talking about this in a way when we did the show on Lucy Letley the other day, right? Which is, that there is a lot of people who believe that there's some great conspiracy behind it. But then, of course, it's a really interesting journalistic question, as we were discussing, because when it is, of course, possible that she were innocent, and as journalists, you have to kind of investigate and look at it. And I suppose the difference is...
But by looking at it, you are giving a sort of... Even when knocking it down, you're giving credibility to the argument.
I mean, look, we probably all of us, without realising it, right, probably believe or have believed or at least considered or at least were willing to consider conspiracy theories, right? Some of them turn out to be true, small number, one way or the other. I suppose the difference with journalism and what you're trying to do is you're approaching it with scepticism, and you're trying to apply the principles of truth and reason to it in a way that usually when you talk to someone who has gone down the rabbit hole, they're simply not willing to do. Usually there's an article of faith to conspiracy, right? In the end, you kind of go around circling, you ask someone, what about this, what about that? And in the end, they'll just say, you really believe that? And that's where the sort of faith comes in, as opposed to kind of logic and reason. And I suppose that would be the difference between a kind of journalistic show like this and podcasts, of which there are legion, which not only develop conspiracy theories, magnify them, amplify them, and propagate them. But you're right. I mean, there is a kind of contradiction or a tension anyway, which is that shows like this are only possible because of the proliferation of technology and the kind of erosion of old school media institutions, no longer having a monopoly on information. But it's precisely those factors and those principles which allow conspiracy theories, which have always been there, as we've been discussing, to become stronger, because people seek out information that they like. And let's be honest, and this is the thing that really makes my heart sing, I suppose. Let's be honest, people who are down the rabbit hole are not subscribed to this podcast, or indeed others like it. They're subscribed to rabid, weird little shows, a bit like The Rest is Politics.
You can answer to Alistair Campbell.
It was a joke, Alistair. It was a joke.
You can tell Alistair Campbell what you really think.
It was a joke.
Should we talk about tomorrow's episode?
Talking to our very own conspiracy theorist, of course. Our very own. No, tomorrow's episode is going to be really good because we've really pulled out the stops for the guest.
Is it taken a lot to book her?
You know what? It actually has. You joke, but it actually has. And we're going to be talking to Emily about her new show. And not podcast show, of course, but her drama about the Prince Andrew interview.
Are you telling me?
Very royal scandal.
Are you telling me she's played hard to get?
She has. You can't be surprised by that. It has been impossible to get a slot. Which is why she's not here today. We had to trade off her doing that show in exchange for not being here for this show. I mean, the main reason I was able to persuade her is that, given you've done so much plugging...
I haven't
Plugging.
I've barely mentioned my book, Strange Land, available in 2 weeks' time.
I need a company or something. I need a business to be able to plug. So I'm starting to feel left out.
Exactly. When your book comes out next year, as it will do, it will be just like that.
There is no book. Anyway.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.